In early 2026, the world braced for what looked like the start of a massive global conflict. Joint American and Israeli airstrikes were pounding Iranian military and nuclear infrastructure, lighting up the night sky across the region. The White House took a hard line right out of the gate. The Trump administration pushed for nothing less than Iran's unconditional surrender, warning of devastating consequences if Tehran refused to comply. But months later, the Iranian government was still standing. The expected total collapse never happened. Instead, the loud threats of military force faded into quiet, back-channel diplomacy. Soon, the focus shifted away from the battlefield and toward the negotiating table. Countries like Qatar, Turkey, and Pakistan stepped in as intermediaries to broker a ceasefire framework between Washington and Tehran. This drastic shift left the global community with a very confusing question. Did the United States actually lose to Iran? Or are superpowers and weaker nations simply playing by two completely different sets of rules when it comes to winning? America set out to achieve four things: stopping Iran's nuclear ambitions, weakening Tehran's regional power, fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz, and demonstrating overwhelming deterrence. This chart shows the massive disparity in conventional military strength, proving the U.S. possessed the firepower to check every box. Because of that massive military advantage, combined with an Iranian economy already heavily isolated and sanctioned, many Western analysts expected Tehran to buckle almost immediately under the pressure. But overwhelming military force hit a brick wall. The United States found out the hard way that thousands of airstrikes cannot easily dismantle an adversary whose entire survival strategy relies on asymmetric leverage. Iran's first major pillar of survival is geography. By sitting next to the Strait of Hormuz, Tehran holds massive leverage over global energy supply. This diagram shows the global oil supply volume, highlighting the nearly 20% of all traded oil that passes through this narrow waterway. If you disrupt even a fraction of that flow, you trigger instant worldwide economic panic. The second pillar is resilience. Over decades of severe sanctions and international isolation, Iran built a political system designed to absorb massive shocks without fracturing. The third pillar is asymmetric warfare. Iran knew it didn't need to defeat the U.S. military in a head-to-head fight. Its only goal was to make the conflict unsustainably expensive and politically unstable for Washington. That instability quickly bleeds into American domestic politics. When global oil routes are threatened, the U.S. economy takes a direct hit at the gas pump, turning a foreign conflict into a massive political liability at home. Facing the prospect of soaring inflation and a destabilized global market, the Trump administration eventually abandoned its demands for total collapse and pivoted to the negotiating table to contain the economic fallout. When an adversary can credibly hold the global economy hostage, pushing for an absolute military victory becomes politically suicidal for a superpower. However, surviving is not the same as thriving. Iran absorbed severe damage to its military infrastructure and faced crushing economic instability throughout the confrontation. As a result of that pressure, Tehran will likely be forced into major strategic concessions at the negotiating table, specifically regarding strict limits on their uranium stockpiles. Because the Iranian government paid massive, long-term economic and structural costs, framing this outcome as a complete or total victory for Tehran ignores the reality on the ground. At the same time, from the American perspective, Washington clearly failed to achieve its primary goal of forcing Iran's unconditional surrender. But inside Iran, the metrics for success are different. Merely avoiding regime collapse and forcing a superpower to compromise is heavily framed as a strategic triumph. This is what a modern geopolitical stalemate looks like. Both sides survive, both claim leverage, but neither achieves their absolute strategic goals. The central lesson of the 2026 crisis is clear. In a hyper-connected global economy, absolute military dominance no longer guarantees total compliance. Superpowers now have to navigate a world where brute force has strict limits.